Royal Oak, its story, as told by the people that lived it. We'll walk the streets of yesteryear and relive the days of the horse and buggy when times were much simpler and things moved slower. We'll visit historical buildings and look at age-old artifacts, which will always be a part of Royal Oak after the people move on. We'll observe the city as it has grown and prospered, and then wonder, what will tomorrow bring? To the people, to the places, to the things of Royal Oak.
Hello, welcome to A Walk Back in Time. Do you remember? I'm Thelma Baker. I want to welcome Owen Perkins, who is with us today to share the history of the community of Royal Oak. How are you, Owen?
Fine, thank you, Thelma.
Welcome to Channel 55. Before we get into our program, Owen, I would like to say just a little bit about you. Owen C. Perkins is not a native Royal Oaker. He was born in Romeo, Michigan in 1902. The Perkins family moved here in 1912 so his father could work in the Pring Knits Planning Mill on Lincoln Avenue. The Perkins furniture was moved to Royal Oak by horse and wagon, and the family came by streetcar. The population then was about 2,000. Owen attended a small frame school on the corner of Lincoln and Center. Later, he attended the Union School on the same property. Owen graduated in 1921 from Royal Oak High School, which was located at Maine and University. The school later became Clara Barton Junior High. While in high school, Owen participated in baseball, football, and basketball, serving as captain the last 2 years. He then attended Albion College. He stayed out of college for a year and became an employee of the city of Royal Oak in 1922. He worked for the city during his summer vacations. While in college, he participated in football, baseball, serving as captain. After graduating from college, he became a full-time employee of the city of Royal Oak in the engineering department. Oh, and before we start, I would like to know how you got the idea to write "Do You Remember" in verse form.
Well, it started back in about 1950. An employee of the city retired, and I made up a history of Royal Oak and had his name in it various times as years progressed.
I see. So you've been writing poetry then?
For a long time, yes.
Long while then. Now, before you start to read on, do you believe in free speech?
Well, the first time I put on a program, a man asked me if I believed in free speech, and I told him yes. He says, well, that's good because we don't have any money to pay you with anyway.
Okay. Well, you can proceed with the program then, okay?
Thank you. When time goes drifting by us and youth has slipped from view, we search through the land of memories for things we used to do. And as our minds go back again when we were young and gay, it doesn't seem like many years, it seems like yesterday. It's just like we were young again in peace and comfort rare, and our most cherished memories are just our own to share. And that is why we like to go back where our dreams began and wander through our memories and think of things that have been. Looking back in 1819 history, one might recall a trip taken in the late fall by Michigan Governor Lewis Cass in broad daylight, rested under a large oak tree at Main and Crook's site. Looking up into the magnificent branches he spoke, "This is truly a royal oak," and thus the area got its name. In 1832, Royal Oak Township it became. This tree was a decision of a survey and established the baselines we use today. The area was occupied by many Indian tribes until the 1600s a white man did arrive. Early Royal Oak was settled by emigrants who really settled here by chance. The land was swampy with lots of brush, so cutting the brush down was a must. There were huckleberry swamps and cranberry bogs, where one could hear the croaking of the frogs. Logging later became a big industry as they cut down tree after tree. The federal government sold land very cheap. $1.25 per acre is all they did reap. As the area increased in white population, the Indians were required to have reservations. The Indians made trails way back when. Evidence of one is where Cook Road bends. Clinton River branches through the oak did flow. Red Run Creek was the main one we know. Steel and wood bridges, yes, I remember 4, even though there might have been more. Homes were constructed with large logs as a rule. Smaller logs for cooking and fireplace fuel. The first tavern was built in 1824. At Washington and 4th Street did open his store. In 1826, John Lockwood became the first postmaster, with many more prominent men to follow after. The post office was located in many places about town until 1934 on 2nd Street, a permanent site was found. In 1828, a cemetery was laid out in lots, so those who wanted could select a plot. Some of the roads were made of plank. For this small improvement, the farmers gave thanks. In 1829 came the first plank road toll gate. To pay their fee, the farmers had a long wait. In 1830, the area was filled with wild game, infested with wolves as hunters came. In 1838, the First Methodists rented a place to meet in a log building at Main and Lincoln Street. In 1842, the Methodists did search for a place to build their first church. At 1 and 7th, the site was to be a site of more churches, namely 3.
I understand that the First United Methodist Church is celebrating 150 years on?
Yes, the St. Mary's Catholic Church was the first church organized in Royal Oak, but they did not have a building until 1889. And the Methodist Church was organized in 1838, and they had a first building, a little frame white church, in 1842. And then in 1898, they had their second little brick church, and in 1915, they have the present church. All 3 churches were located on the same site.
In the same site, okay, all right.
The village Royal Oak was platted in 1838 and became known as Detroit's Northern Gate. The plat included a railroad right-of-way, and part of the right-of-way remains today. Thus Royal Oak became a railroad town where old-timers gathered round to discuss what was on their mind or anything else they could find. The Orson Star House was built in 1845 on Main, dedicated as a historical site to preserve its name. With such foresight, there had to be wooden rails made from large oak trees. In 1837, the people did hail the first sawmill to make the rails. In 1838 came the first train, hauling passengers, freight, and grain. The first railroad cars were drawn by horses, but not for long. Wood-burning locomotives took their place. With modern improvement, they had to keep pace. Then came the coal-burning steam engine, of course, until the oil-burning engine became a new energy source. Now, as of this date, the Grand Trunk holds only freight. The first store was built in 1838 when Royal Oak was only a township then. Sometime at Quiet Revere we get to reminiscing, looking back to see what we have been missing. John Benjamin built his home in 1854 and made his grain cradles right next door. The home was later used as an antique store, then Aunt Fanny's restaurant, which we see no more. The Starr family were very well known indeed. Many items they made to fill our needs. Starr bricks and cowbells, too, were the important ones we knew.
Why was it necessary to put the cowbells on the cattle on?
Well, years ago, the pastures and fields were not fenced in, so in order to keep track of where their animals were, they put cowbells on. The cowbells were manufactured in Royal Oak. There was a set of 6 small bells for sheep and small animals, and larger set of bells, 7 for horses and cows. And
this is one you brought, isn't it?
yes, that's
Are there very many of these left?
No, that's not a star bell. That was one I bought in 1923, and I put it on my Model T Ford.
Oh, I see.
And I went to, when I go to pick up my girlfriend, I would ring the cowbell. It must have been good because
maybe I ought to put it up here so we
I
can
married the girl.
Are you married?
And we've been married, we've been married 61 years next month on my 86th birthday.
It helped. Okay, you can continue on.
Large fishing boats were built in the Oak and hauled to the Detroit River with oxen with yoke. At Santora Hall was our first township school, built in 1868, a place to teach the Golden Rule. At 4th and Williams was its location, where students could choose their vocation. Remember when teachers taught the Golden Rule and how you could live by it, and when the 3 R's didn't stand for robbery, rape, and riot? At the northwest corner of 4th and Main, a new town hall, built in the 1870s to serve us all. In 1878, the first telephone was put in use. Many technical problems did it produce. In 1884, Lewis Store built his grocery store. Later, he built his brick home right next door. A cyclone hit Royal Oak in 1893, leveling homes and uprooting trees. Electric streetcars came in 1895. For 50 years, they did survive. They ran on Main and 4th Street. At Washington, the Pontiac cars they did meet. They ran to Emmett City and Saginaw. Many passengers did they draw. Freight cars on electric tracks one could see, which proved to be quite a novelty.
Would we stop just a minute? I think we'll back up and talk about the Hammer family. Above here, the Hammer family who were slaves. I thought that was quite interesting. The Underground Railroad, their lives did
yes,
save.
They were, their lives were saved by the Underground Railroad, and they moved their house from Woodard to Crooks Road just a few days before Lincoln was shot. And Mr. Hamer bought a large parcel of land so that each one of their 7 children could have room enough for a lot.
Where was that located at now?
It was located on the east side of Crooks Road, just north of Webster Road.
Oh, yeah. Okay, you can continue on then.
Santora Hall was our first township school, built in 1868, a place to teach the Golden Rule.
I think you did that,
yes.
okay, yeah. Turn over to the next, okay.
A freight shed at Washington and 4th Street was where the freight cars and milk cars would meet. In 1920, the freight shed had to be moved, the owner said, so the commercial bank could be built there instead. In this building, the Mary Jane Flower Shop did start. In the grocery Royal Oak, they had a big part. A new freight shed at Washington and 7th, later to be the site of the college campus, we now see. Electric streetcars and train depots were on 4th Street, where their respective tracks did meet. The Royal Oak area became a village in 1891 and remained a village until 1921. In 1900, William Hilsinger could see electric lights so all could see. 14 street lights, 5 houses, and 4 stores were all the power he could furnish, and no more. In 1909, electric powerhouse at Main and 7th made it possible to light up the heavens. The building is now being used by Billings Feed for storage purpose that they had a need. The Royal Oak Women's Club was organized in 1902, and if any are still living, there are very few. A new school needed, the parents knew, so the Union School was built in 1902.
Don't you have a couple of pictures there of the Union School here?
Yes, this is an etching of the Union School, which was built in 1902.
Now about the other one.
This one is a picture of Main Street between 3rd and 4th. That was the main part of town in 1902, And those buildings either burnt down or were removed and replaced by other buildings. The only original building in the block is Herman's Bakery.
Thank you. Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I thought I'd like to we'd see those pictures that you brought. Okay. Top of the page there on Fort 13.
Very few of my friends ever knew I was born in Romeo in 1902. I was such a little dear, and at 85 I'm still here. Of all the old stores the citizens knew, Don Nero's Bakery was built in 1902. It's the only original building that remains, and now it bears the Herman Bakery name.
Now, what happened to the other buildings in that block?
Well, the two-story building burned down and the others were removed. There was a pool hall and a feed store and a jewelry store, big shop.
I think I remember the jewelry store. What was the name of that now? That was
What was that?
jewelry store. I'm trying to think of the name of it.
Codling's had a jewelry store there, and they later moved over to another corner on 3rd Street.
Okay, go ahead. Go on.
Remember when little girls wore port tucks and pleats and women's skirts had gathers, when hats were trimmed with saucy birds or fancy ostrich feathers? Castandero and Yipes were places about town where one's sorrows they could drown. In 1905, the Hotel Royal at 4th and Center, owner William McCavey registered people as they did enter. When we went, Woodard and Lincoln was a swimming hole where we went skating when it was cold. The Union School was built in 1902, was large enough then, but had to be enlarged in 1910. Looking back again, we're not too far, we picture ourselves on a streetcar. And as we sat there and forward look, we know why this trolley we took. We were on our way to the Oak to visit some of our kinfolk. How long we'll stay, it is not known. We may decide to make Royal Oak our home. This happened about 1910. Halley's Comet could be seen then. Then down the aisle there comes George Scott. He's the conductor, believe it or not. Then as the car sways and as it teeters, ahead of us we see John Peters. He's the station agent for this streetcar, which is then known as the DUR. John was a village president, I understand, and played the bass horn in the town band. Then as we arrive in this small town, we stop and look all around. Trees and sandbirds we did see, yellow sand up to our knees. The population then, I would guess, was 2,000 persons, more or less. The first public water system was built in 1912, good drinking water from very deep wells.
Owen, I'd like to interrupt you just a minute. I'd like to talk about the schools. The San Sara Hall was our, very first township school here in Royal Oak?
It was the first township school, and
it was in 1868 it was built at 4th and Williams, right?
4th and Williams.
But it was the first...
It was first built for a high school, or for a school in Royal Oak.
But it's our first school then
but
here.
But it didn't have high schools in it.
No, right, but that was the first school. Yeah. And then you attended the small frame schoolhouse that you had mentioned.
Yeah, I attended that first, then I attended the Union School later on.
And then you went to the school that was built at University, Maine,
yes,
which was
the high school,
first
high building school. Built for a high school.
And that was called Royal Oak High School at that time,
yes,
and then it was changed to Clara Barton Junior High.
Yes, then it was torn down.
And then what, was it 3 years ago that school was torn down? Has it been 3 years?
4 or 5 years ago. The school
yeah, and then the senior high rise was built there, right? Yeah. Okay, I attended the Clara Barton Junior High for a couple of years before I went on to Don Darrow. So did you feel bad when that school was torn down?
Yes, I tried, along with Barbara Hullman, the later mayor. We took the city into court to try to save it. It was one of the strongest building in Royal Oak, and had a gymnasium and 2 big assembly halls, and rooms that they could have rented out for use. But
I kind of felt bad too, because I thought it really should have been saved because of the history, you know, just for history alone for the city here. And also then they had built the Don Darrow High School on Washington.
They built in 1926.
Right.
Yes.
And that was named after what? The first mayor, George John Darrow.
George John Darrow. And George John Darrow loaned me all my money to go to college.
Is that right?
Yes. And they paid them all back. When I got married, I still owed them $1,000, which I paid back at 6% interest.
Is that right? And then the village became a city, what, in 1921? Actually, it became a city in 1921. And then you were talking about the electric streetcars. They were here for 50 years, right?
Yes.
And then they ran, what, they ran up and down Main?
They ran down Washington to 4th, and east on 4th to Main, and north on Main to Clawson, Rochester, and it branched off in Rochester and went to Romeo, Almont, and Enemy City, and they branched to the north in Rochester and went to Flint, Saginaw, and Bay City.
They traveled, well, they traveled quite far then, really.
Yeah. And then the Pontiac cars ran up Washington Avenue to 11 Mile Road and west to Little Woodard and north to Birmingham, Pontiac.
And then I think we mentioned the Toonerville trolley. They had a Toonerville trolley.
Toonerville trolley was ran on 4th Street from Main to Stevenson, down Stevenson, and then into Highland Park for Ford's factory. It was a car that could be run from either end, so they didn't have to turn around. They just went from one end to the other.
I believe when we moved to Royal Oak in '51, those tracks were still in front of our home, and then I think a year later they had removed the tracks of the Toonerville trolley. Okay.
In 1912, my parents could see a future in Royal Oak there had to be. We moved to Royal Oak from Romeo, I remember it still, so my father could work in Perkins spinning mill. Our belongings were moved by a wagon with horses drawn and arrived late at night after starting at dawn. Family came by electric streetcar. As a youngster, it seemed so far. My parents on Lincoln rented a home. By the Lawson family, it was owned. Our neighbors on either side, wouldn't you know, had been our neighbors in Romeo. An amusement, there was only one place to go, the Roy Idlehouse Theater, our only show. About this time, Ford decided to pay all employees $5 per day. As citizens, the people could see this was to affect our economy. In 1915, a house-to-house mail service was starting. The first woman carrier was Mildred Parody Martin.
May I interrupt you just there, because I think you had made a remark to me the other day that she was our first male woman carrier in the USA, right?
Yes, she was the first one in the early 20s, and she died about 6 months ago.
But she was the first in the whole USA.
That's right.
Right, okay.
The Royal Oak Merchant Boosters went on a streetcar. Each year to the Emerald City Fair is not too far. They would get off in every little town on the way so they could parade and the band could play. For $40,000, a new seat of learning we did gain, a new high school at University in Maine. In 1916, the village library was authorized. Over it, Elizabeth Briggs did preside. Do you remember when families never did have separate beds for all their kids? The Royal Theater built in 1914 with a modern stage. 4 years later, in a theatrical play, I did engage. In 1960, Father's aim was more payment on 1st, Washington, and Maine. The Women's Christian Temple Union by admission in 1919 worked for and helped to bring prohibition. Bowden and Martin and Lister's too, for dry goods stores we all knew. There was Toll and Unger's at Randall's store, and Atlantic Pacific, our first chain store. Now the Union School we used to meet at Lottie Watts Candy store for a treat. Remember Lockbridger's antiquated dry goods store? This unique type of business we see no more. The town halls at Main and 3rd Street were where the township fathers used to meet. It was built at the Baptist Church in 1839 and since has stood the ravages of time. Later, the building became the City Hall, which some of you will recall. The fire hall was in east side of Main near 6, where the city garage with equipment they did fix. Firemen in the village could not afford, so volunteers had to fight the fires. Birmingham and Royal Apartments used to meet for water battles on Main Street. St. Mary's Church Bell at 5th and Main summoned the firemen who running came. Families gathered at the bandstand on Saturday night to enjoy the music as it sat under the street lights. On Washington was D.K. Smith's furniture store with Goodfellow's Bakery right next door. Hagelstein's was another baker's shop. They're still in business, believe it or not. They must have been in financial trouble. At least I think so, because a sign on the window said, "We need your dough."
What other items were made in Royal Oak in its early history?
Well, they made brooms, wooden rails for the train, fish nets, small plows, wagons, drain tile, and cranberry rakes. And in the 1930s, Royal Oak was known as the rhubarb center of the world. It was shipped all over the world.
The rhubarb center.
Yeah.
Now, in this time, all I can picture is all these sand roads. Were they sand or dirt roads?
They were sand. Sand
were
is
sand,
about
not dirt.
6 feet deep before you get to the clay.
That must have been awfully hard for the wagons and horses to go through.
It was. It was just
must have
a
been
wheel
very-
track would be sunk down in the dirt maybe 6, 8, 10 inches.
You say it must have been very difficult.
In 1917, on Woodard, the first concrete pavement was laid. Only 2 lanes, but what an improvement it made. In 1918, a historical marker was placed near Maine, where the Governor Cass brought Royal Oak fame. Then came the First World War. Times were hard, coal was scarce, there was sugar and lard. Finally, the war did cease for what we thought everlasting peace. Remember when courting meant holding hands and kissing caused a rumpus, and schools were opened with a prayer instead of sex instruction? While the senior high school, I was well behaved. I was gave a substitute teacher job, and I got paid. Being a substitute teacher, I had the power, so I kept my girlfriend an extra hour. Many, many years ago, in a class of 51, I was graduating Royal Oak High School in 21. In 1921, the people took a vote to make the village the city of Royal Oak. So the city was on its way. The first city manager was Phil Beauvais. The village offices became the city hall, as I already informed you, you will recall. George Dondero became the first mayor. He also occupied the school board's president's chair. Later on, Dondero another election won. Thus he became our first congressman. In this office, he worked day after day as he promoted the St. Lawrence Waterway. Bill Broomfield, Dondero, he did succeed. He is still serving as congressman, yes indeed. The rest of the city boundaries then were Catawba, Knowles, Maxwell, and 10. Automobiles were few and far between. Horses and wagons could still be seen. Milk and ice were delivered door to door by horse-drawn vehicles, which you see no more. The interim cars of Washington 4th Street would stop, while Gil Davis stole peanuts and off he would hop. Mettler's ice cream store used to be there on land now occupied by Washington Square. You probably don't recall the big pine trees which occupied the site of SS Kresge's. The Walden Theater was built in 1922, was named her first I knew. Mabel Walden was her name. Her first city commissioner she became. Hedges Wigwam, a neat place to eat, where wooden Indians the customers could greet. During the hunting season they would be deers on display for all to see. Do you remember when drugstores sold only drugs, not lawnmowers, groceries, and rugs? There were no sewers of which to keep track, but plenty of chick sales outhouses out in the back. The fire department is still made of volunteers who have kept organized down through the years. In 1916, Lalonde, a volunteer fireman who, while doing his part, killed while riding to a fire on a 2-wheel hose cart. The police department had 1 or 2 for a while. The chief of police was old like wow. The city could not afford, but they did build a police and fire switchboard. Our fund my column, so they say, operate the switchboard during the day.
Okay, let's stop a little bit. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Baldwin Theater. The first lady city commissioner was Mabel Baldwin, right?
Yes.
So the theater was named after her.
Yeah.
Right. And then the Royal Oak Theater was built, what, in 1914?
Yes,
Right. And then we were talking about libraries on the way over here today. In 1916, the first village library. Is that right? Was that the first one for the city? Do you
Well, the
remember?
libraries go way back to 1852.
Oh, I see.
As a township had them, but they became a library in 52, and the library was in the old bank building at the corner of Main and 4th Street on the 2nd floor. And the judge's court was right next door to that.
I remember you said there was quite a few libraries. We've got quite a few libraries here now, right?
Our library has been in 6 different buildings in the city of Royal Oak.
Is that right?
Yeah.
6 different buildings. I also wanted to just make a remark about the Washington Theater, because I had been there so many times when I was a young girl, and we used to line up around Montgomery Ward's to go see the Shirley Temple movies there. So I just wanted to make a little remark about her. Okay, you can continue.
Martin Bishop was the first paid fire chief, so in 1924, better protection, what a relief. There were sand and sandburrs too, ruts in the street, not just a few. Some of the stores that were here then was Winters, Codney, and Betty Cohen. Nargane's was a 5 and 10 cent store with Billy Bell's barber shop right next door. George John Deere had his law office in a seed store and kept his horse and buggy at the front door. The Red Oak Savings Bank was at 4th and Main. The old bank building still remains. The village library was on the 2nd floor with the Justice Court right next door. Judge Bonnage, who was blind, served as a judge for a long, long time. Herb Critter, Lawson, McCall's, and Mellon Wrights as lumber companies did all right. The Royal Oak Stationery Store was originally on Main, now at 4th and Washington under Kleba's name. Now at the 4th and Washington under, I've read that. In 1920, the Toonerville trolley, which made fun on Washington, Stevens and 4th Street, it did run.
Yeah, we were talking about the Toonerville trolley. You said something that it just had to, turn around and go back the other way?
It didn't have to turn around. It just went, the conductor went from one end to the other and just went the opposite way. The controls on both ends of the street.
Oh, I see. So they just had to go, they could go either way then.
That's right.
Okay.
About this time, you must concede, Royal Oak was very fortunate indeed, for at this time the city there came to work a smart young fellow by the name of Perk. The driver of the fire truck was on vacation. I was told to stay at the station in case of fire to drive the truck. I must have been really good luck, for I did not know how to drive a car. But when you're young, you know how brave you are. I practiced driving in and out of the station. Thank goodness the driver cut short his vacation. A chief of police gave me a .45 pistol, a police badge, and a police whistle to direct traffic on Woodard when there's only 2 lanes. Thus I became a real policeman. Only one violation I wrote at that time to a driver who gave me a peace of mind. The dirty pavement caused a blight, so I helped to clean them on Saturday night. Back in those days, there were 3 banks. There were no taverns, as no one drank. In 1926, I moved to Paris to sign a little flower for Father Coughlin broadcast his radio hour. In 1928, the city of Royal Oak began to grow. Washington Square was built, including the Kunsky show. Remember when Jake Levi would sell you cheap gas, then turn around and give you jam in a small glass?
You remember the long lines, just as your eye, but you remember the long lines at Levi's gas station during the war?
He was on just north of University, and the lineup would be up to Catalpa and west on Catalpa. All attempting to get gas, because gas is so short. The farmer's market was built in 1925 on East 11 Mile, built as a flea market on Sundays for a while. The Julius store operated a shoe store with Nargan's shoe repair right next door. Years ago, Royal Oak had a young lawyer named Bill who stayed up all night trying to break a young girl's will. Back in those days, when one died in a black funeral car, you might get a ride. Undertaker Rutherford and Billy Sullivan, that it be said, gave the utmost attention to the dead. The funeral director operated with a lot of pride. In the horse-drawn vehicle, you might get a ride. One undertaker had a sign in the window which read, "We can bury you for $35, so why walk around half dead?" The 4th and Washington Bristol Real Estate was there before Montgomery Ward opened its doors. Monkey Ward's business was growing fast, but years later it failed to pass. Cressy's, Nizers, and Woolworths were real 5 and 10s. Lawnmowers were not sold in them then. In 1919, Eckstein Lakey, a Ford dealer with tack, offered to sell you a color, any color you want, as long as it's black. In 1923, from this dealer, I bought my first Ford for $300, which I couldn't afford.
$300? Can you imagine paying $300 for an automobile today, Owen? They're up to about, what, $21,000?
The last one cost more than my house and garage.
Right.
Smith, Brampton, Lawson, Nizer, too, used to sell hardware to you and you. Raise your glasses high, high, high. Liquor by the glass the voters did buy. Because the building would not hold them all, in 1923 they moved to City Hall to a large store home on South Main Street, south of 4th Street, a few hundred feet. The old City Hall, which they outgrew, what to do with it some women knew. It moved to Lafayette and then West 4th Street, where the Swallow Women's Club now does meet. Do you remember when clothes were washed in a tub and on a rough board your mother did scrub, and then hung out of doors on a clothesline? The long underwear froze like a ghost at the wintertime. In 1925, the Tribune, with which we are familiar, was made a daily paper by the Millers. In 1926, the new high school we had to have, till Don Duro was built on Washington Ave.
Okay, Owen, I'd like to review just a little bit. I understand you had several different jobs in Royal Oak before you even hired in there, really. You did a lot of work after you got out of college.
After 1 year of college, I stayed out and went to work for the city in 1922 as DPW and water department, where I helped lay water in sewer mains and red water mills. I shoveled snow in the wintertime off the Main Street intersections, and I drove fire truck and I acted as a policeman, and then I later went into the inspection department. When I went in the engineering department for the rest, and then I went back to college and finished college.
Oh, I see. And then after you got out of college,
I went back with the city in the engineering department, and in 1931 I became chief inspector,
I see.
which I held for 36 years.
I also wanted to mention, I understood there was a cyclone that hit Royal Oak in, what, 1893?
1893.
Right, leveling the homes and uprooting all the trees.
Yes, there's pictures of it in our son's history book.
Oh, there is?
Book, yes.
Now, I don't think we mentioned about the telephone. The first telephone was, what, 1878?
Yes, we haven't got that. We already go by it.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, yes, that was
And now, do you remember also the Hedges Wigwam on Woodward?
Yes,
with the large wooden Indians?
Yes, it was wooden Indians outdoors, and the tables were covered with glass and moth and plants and butterflies.
Yeah, it's very attractive inside, very attractive, Okay, all right, you continue if you'd like to read.
In 1926, Detroit opened the Detroit Zoo. I played baseball at the zoo in 22. On the ball diamond, I gained a little fame, for I pitched a perfect game. 27 batters I did face. By strikeout, 15 batters I did erase. Famous were in great demand. Autos could no longer travel in the sand. Sewers admitted, everybody could tell, for the open ditches began to smell. The Greasy Spoon restaurant did not stay. The cockroach soon carried it away. In 1925, again the city hall became too small, so the city built a new city hall. It was not too large, but rather neat. It was located on East 3rd Street. About this time, there happened to be a city manager by the name of Raymond Whitney. He must have been in somewhat of a daze. He cut the city employees' salaries and himself took a raise.
That sounds quite familiar, doesn't it, Owen? According to the newspapers lately.
In 1927, Alice Lemon became my wife. For 63 years, she's been a part of my life. I have a wife who never tarries, one who shares all my worries. I have a wife who's never late, whose seams in her stockings are always straight. I have a wife whom I love, who is as calm and cool as a turtle dove. I have a wife who I adore, and dear life, I ask no more. She is perfect. Why the scarcity of water the people did ask, as they took the city fathers to task. So with Detroit, the city did agree, use their water, but not for free. They installed a 4-foot tank, a main and then a tank. the polluted river water we then drank. I had charge of inspecting the main from Detroit until it was completed.
I understand, though, is the water tank at Woodward and 10 Mile, is that still being used?
It's still there, but it's not being used. It advertises Mayor Coleman.
Oh, it advertises Mayor Coleman, okay. All right.
In 1930, Royal Oak Savings, Commercial, and National Banks were three banking institutions that later sank. In 1930, automobiles were to have their day. Woodward Avenue was made the first superhighway. The Ramtron tracks on Woodward lay. They had to be moved to a new right-of-way. As the Depression of the 30s came along, it seems that everything went wrong. In 1931, we heard it said a new city manager was to be Ed. He was appointed to city manager post. Shafter was an official of whom we could boast. In 1931, I was appointed chief inspector by Mr. Shafter. For 36 years, many jobs I had to look after. I asked the city manager how many employees for the city to work. About half, he replied with a disdainful smirk. In 1931, our cause could see transportation there needed to be. So the streetcar tracks the city to buy to provide transportation, or you and I. Detroit streetcars on these tracks for a time so they could ride to Detroit for a dime. In 1947, the cars stopped running in May, not enough passengers to make them pay. To protect their home, the Commission see a zoning ordinance there need to be. The ordinance was adopted in 1933 and served us well, for it protects the homes in which we dwell. Those who live near the tracks will recall the biggest controversy of them all, when the zoning board had the final say about the Edison Towers at the railroad right-of-way. Harry Jones, who was the chairman of the board for over 30 years, at the present he's past president of the society, and he usually is here.
Oh, and I wanted to stop just a minute. I wanted to ask you something about your wife. Wasn't there something you used to say was kind of cute about your wife when you used to introduce her to people?
Well, I'm one of very few I can say. I married a lemon.
You married a lemon? Her name was Alice Lemon then. Gee, how did she react to this the first time you did that?
Well, the first time she was kind of surprised, but I've done it 1,000 times since then.
She didn't say anything then. I mean, she didn't make a big issue of it then, right?
No, no.
You introducing her as a lemon?
No.
Well, I don't know how I feel about
She's
that.
a sweet lemon. Then in the 30s, which without a doubt was the worst of them all, for the bottom fell out. Depression was on its way. Hard times were here to stay. Do you remember when garden plots and garden seeds were handed out to fill our needs? Banks closed, and with the crash, away went our savings and our cash. Stores closed and factories shut down. There was no work to be found. The welfare load became too great. No one knew what might be their fate. The alphabetical soup then came our way. One of the varieties was PWA. The HOLC would give you a loan in an effort to save your home. Property was lost much every day. The owners their taxes they could not pay. You remember when people used to dance a jig because the government paid them for not raising pigs? Meeting the condition which arise, the fathers did devise a method by which to pay their bills as they cut out all the fancy fills. They printed script with which to pay their own bills and employees each day. The script later held its value, so as it seemed, and later the script was all redeemed. In 1936, the Ballroom Theater, where we had fun, had its name changed to the Washington. Gladys Holmes was appointed city clerk. Her middle name was Work, Work, Work. I served for 15 years as deputy city clerk, while many other jobs I did work. As the Docks and Weed Commissioner, I was known, made people cut their weeds around their home. Organization was formed in 1940, known as the Royal Oak Historical Society. The society has been meeting ever since. The first society dinner cost 65 cents. Dr. Morrison, the society's president, had a son Morrison, Maynard Morrison, while at U of M, a football All-American. Slot machines on the streets they did place. A must be paid for your parking space. So into the 40s we could go. What's ahead of us, no one knows. Tax-abandoned land the city sold to get the property back on the roll.
Now, what did the lot sell for at that time?
The lot sold for $50, and they were pavement, water, sewer, and sidewalk in front of them all.
That was in any part of the city?
Any part of the
any
city.
part of the city.
The Campbell Tourist cabins were at Twix and 12, where transit travelers could temporarily dwell. Pearl Harbor gave us an awful square. What destruction the Japs caused there. There were hardships everywhere. Very few people did despair. Butter, sugar, coffee, tea was rancid out to you and me. Gasoline was rationed too, so little driving did we do. For recreation after dark, Memorial Field became a lighted park. You remember Sparks, whom we called Jake? Many types of business he did operate. Motel, radio, bakery, shoe and music store, old-timer digits, funeral parlor, and many more. I worked for Jake in his bakery, where I heard him tell how I loafed to the bread and made the donuts as well. The building boom was really here, 200 homes in just 1 year. All the building really meant was more sewer, water, and pavement.
Now, I want to stop you just a minute. We're talking about rationing back here. I remember I worked at the co-op grocery store in Dearborn back when we were rationing out sugar and flour and butter and all this. And I remember they'd store it way at the back room, and I'd be up at the counter, the cashier at the front, and I'd be running back and forth trying to get all these rations for these people. And then I'd be sneaking them stuff, from under the counter.
Coal was rising, and you had to buy it by the bushel. Now, a bushel of coal didn't last very long.
No, I wouldn't think so, no.
Sil Christie, a city commissioner with a heart of gold, to organize a boys' club was his goal. He made his goal a big success, a boys' and girls' club that is the best. Remember when ice cream cones were a dime and liquor sticks a nickel, and moonlight rides were a thrill, and nice girls weren't fickle? The Department of Public Works are very proud to have a new building equipment to house. The city was growing by leaps and bounds. New city offices had to be found. In 1953, we moved into the new city hall, and one of three who has worked in the mall. Bill Herbert, a banker and former mayor, on 2 separate occasions occupied the mayor's chair. A new high school had to be built. What to call it caused quite a tilt. The name Clarence Kimball was selected because through the school board he had been elected. A cross-eyed teacher had good scruples, but she could not control her pupils.
Let's stop a minute. I want to talk about the city halls. We had quite a few, didn't we? There were actually, 4 city halls, since 1839. And the first one was a Baptist.
The city halls from 1921. There's a village before that in township.
Yeah, well, then the Baptist church that was built at Main and 3rd, 1839, that was used by the forefathers, right?
That was the first city hall.
Yeah, that was the first city hall used by our forefathers.
Yeah.
And then they had turned that over to us, right, as a city hall.
Well, the township had it as a township, and then the city took it from the township.
Yeah, later it became the city hall. Then there was the city hall at 4th and Main in 1870.
Yes.
Right. And the one at 211 East 3rd. 1925. So we actually had what? We had what, 4 then, right? Right, okay.
The hospital was located in Washington Square. In 1930, our son Owen A. was born there. We also have a daughter, Mrs. Freeman, Donna Lee, gets her looks from her mother and not me. For Bowman Hospital, we're thankful indeed for it helped to fulfill our medical needs. Do you remember when pregnant women used to stay home instead of in shorts the streets to roam? The Tribune occupied the property before Doby's opened their jewelry store. A new library was built in '63, of which we're very proud, but unrestricted use of toilets was not allowed. After 35 years, Shafter was to retire. The commission knew who they planned to hire. So the city became a city of love. Bruce was the city manager we thought a lot of.
Anytime you'd like me to read, just say so.
Ray Hayward, chief of police for many years, when he retired, crooks shed no tears. A new police station we finally got. the whole department went to Potts. Do you remember how Potts got to be chief? I'll tell you how and make it brief. A convict escaped from his prison cell, so the warden all police departments he did tell, by sending out 6 different pictures of the same man, asking them to recapture him as fast as he can. Potts, just a little ambitious young cop from the sticks, wired the warden, "I've captured 5 and a trail of 6. There was a mayor who always blew his own horn. Vern Horn has been doing it ever since he was born. Jim Soule was appointed next chief of police. A department of soul, what a relief. After 43 years with the city, I began to tire. So in 1967, I did retire. So many years have come and gone, so many days yet to be. When 2 of the others join, they constitute eternity. Years ago, the Oak had a citizen who was so baffled at times, he would go in the closet to change his mind. Centennial are scarce, but Wild Oak has 2. Doris McGinnis and William Anger are 2. 50 years as the city of Rogue did celebrate in 1971, Golden Jubilee, not Watergate. It also in 71, O&A book did appear, The History of Rogue, Michigan, in the early years. Last paper which threw away, which may cause a shortage someday. So Barbara Hallman, bless her soul, to start a salvage center was her goal. A beautiful committee she could see was needed to keep the city leader free.
I understand that you were instrumental in Mayor Barbara Hallman's becoming interested in the beautification of the city.
Yes, I was a charter member of the Beautification Council of Michigan, and I served as vice president for 3 years until I retired. And I got Barbara interesting, so I would take her to the various meetings once a month with me, and that's how she got interested and had these beautification projects for the city.
Okay.
A new golf course, an ice rink too, to serve all generations, including you. In the 60s, what a surprise, they built the first high-rise. Raver Presley operates a beauty school where he makes women beautiful as a rule. A 3-decker parking lot on Center Street helped to take the autos off the street. Local historian O&A and O&C have both served as presidents of the Historical Society. Financial trouble, I'm sure you know, caused a cash deficit to grow and grow. The Royal Oak Director of Finance took an unsuccessful money transfer chance, spending department funds that were not there. The responsibility the city manager had to share. Bruce Love, the city manager, did resign and left all his troubles behind. The city commission did not hesitate. They appointed William Baldridge. Royal Oak High School became Clara Barton, I recall, until it was demolished by the Breckers' wrecking ball. Do you remember when Grandma's hair used to be gray instead of pretty sharp blonde they are today? Barton Towers, a second high-rise, apartment for rent they did advertise. Bill Muncie, our local high school lad, the greatest speedboat rider the U.S. ever had. The city commission wanted all to know how they planned to save him dough. A rubbish company they did hire, so many employees had to be fired. Remember when girls wore rats in their hair and petticoats that rustle, when dresses stuck way out behind, supported by a bustle? The mayor did design to succeed in the appointment of new mayor indeed. The political moves were not a success. Rather the election you can guess. Barbara Hallman was elected mayor. 3 women not occupy the commissioner's chairs. I-696 Expressway is on its way after many, many long days. The Tribune United installed cable TV. Now more soap operas we can see. I myself made some Pepsi, for I received a Distinguished Citizens Award in 1983. The Ocean Star House on Main the city did buy in 71. Now on Crooks Road they bought another one. The Almond Star House for $125 the city did buy, and sold it for $50. Oh my, oh my, oh my. A new community center we have very nice where senior citizens go and enjoy life. A place to go and a place to meet. A place to enjoy one another and to eat. The stagecraft was did in '84 to side the Belden Theater to restore. So in 1885, the Belden Theater was revived. Royal Oak has many greeds, 32 churches to fill our religious need. The poor taxpayers were told $24 million to fix the potholes. A favorable vote the voters did cast. Now the roads can be fixed at last. 25,000 city spent to move the Veterans Monument. Now as come to the end of '85, trustees 5 and 10 failed to survive. By now the people are aware we have Bob Stocker as our mayor. We wish him well and no duck too in everything he attempts to do. Looking back when you were young, did you foresee or vision all the wonderful things that God has given? Our generation has seen more inventions than we have time here to mention. Every time I travel down memory lane, I always end with this refrain. I love those dear hearts and gentle people who live and love in my hometown. So as you come to the end of Do You Remember, time will fly by in its merry way. Royal Oak can no longer grow every day. But the city has much to give. It is a very good place to live. We hope you have been enjoyed listening. See you old friends reminiscing. I thank you, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much, Owen. Now, I understand you have seen mayors come and go.
Yeah. I've worked under every mayor from 1922 to 1967.
That's quite a few, and then you've seen electric cars, you've seen so many schools built, and you've seen one especially torn down.
Yeah.
I know that was close to you and me, the Clara Barton Junior High, and also you've seen your belongings moved from Romeo, Michigan, brought down here by wagon and horses, and you came by streetcar, right?
Quite a coincidence. We moved in with two people here who are our neighbors in Romeo.
Yeah, right, and you've also seen milk and ice delivered by horse and wagon. You've seen the Royal Oak and Baldwin Theater built, and now you see drive-in theaters, drive-in fast food restaurants, drive-in banks, and you see cable TV, the People Movers, the Renaissance Center. What do you think about all this progress?
Oh,
What do you think about all the drive-in stuff? It's something, isn't it?
It's just one of the fads at this time.
It's part of the progress that we are undertaking. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, Owen.
You're
We
welcome.
thank you very much. I am Thelma
I'm sorry
Baker.
if my voice didn't carry good because
Oh, I'm sure you were fine. I'm Thelma Baker for A Walk Back in Time. Do you remember?
Hello, my name is Larry Trudell. We answer approximately 10 alarms a day, 365 days a year. When an alarm sounds, firefighters respond as fast as possible. One way to ensure a fast response is to regularly check and maintain your alarm system. This message brought to you by the Royal Oak Fire Department.
I'll fix it.
Warning labels are there for a reason. Read them. An important safety message from Underwriters Laboratories and this station.